I lay in bed, my body consumed by a fever so high that even moving felt impossible. In my desperation, I asked my oldest son to bring me a glass of water, hoping for at least that small kindness. To my astonishment, he returned not with water, but with a glass of beer, which he proceeded to splash all over me as I lay helpless, burning with fever. From the doorway, laughter echoed in my ears. There was my daughter-in-law, clapping her hands in delight alongside him. My son stood there, still chuckling, the empty glass in his hand. I could hardly believe the scene unfolding before me. Despite my fever-induced haze, it burned into my memory, vivid and clear. "Clean the house before we get back, okay?" they said, their laughter trailing off as they left. Until that moment, I had tolerated my son Reeker and his wife's selfishness, but this was the breaking point. I felt a surge of frustration. "Yes, I'll clean it," I replied, forcing the words through the pain in my throat, loud enough for them to hear as they walked out. My name is Sloan, and I'm a 71-year-old woman who has spent most of my life as a housewife. My husband, Holden, is 73. Since retiring, he has been teaching calligraphy to kids at a local community center, fulfilling a lifelong dream. It brings me joy to see him smile and head off to the center each day. We have 2 sons. Our younger son is married with 2 elementary school children, while our older son, at 42, still lives at home, unmarried and working part-time at a convenience store. He only works 4 nights a week and contributes nothing to the household. Over time, both Holden and I grew weary of nagging him to change his lazy ways. At least he wasn't gambling or accumulating debt, but we had resigned ourselves to his lifestyle. Then, unexpectedly, he announced that he had gotten married, bringing his wife home without any warning. She entered our house as if it were perfectly normal, and from that moment, I found myself cooking and cleaning for her as well. At first, I didn't mind preparing meals for her, but it soon became clear she had no intention of helping out around the house. She wouldn't even clean up after dinner and never offered a simple thank you. Worse still, she made demands like wanting coffee after dinner, treating me less like a mother-in-law and more like a maid. Holden couldn't stand watching this unfold any longer. He confronted our son and his wife about their rudeness, and while they toned down their outrageous requests when he was around, as soon as he left, my daughter-in-law would pick up right where she left off. "Mother-in-law, can you take this dress to the cleaners for me?" she'd say, her entitlement grating on my nerves. When I finally voiced my frustrations, my son defended her, saying, "It's just a small errand you can do while you're out shopping. Why are you being so stingy?" Hearing him talk to me like that hurt deeply, especially since neither of them contributed anything to the household. We provided them with food and shelter, yet they had the audacity to ask for more. I thought about discussing it with Holden but didn't want to spark an argument between him and our son. So once again, I bit my tongue and took the dress to the cleaners. Typically, we visit our younger son's family in Canada twice a year, and we were preparing for another trip soon, with a week-long holiday coming up. We always looked forward to these visits. Our grandchildren had become very attached to us, and we cherished the time we spent together. We had already bought toys for them, and I planned to pick up a special roll cake on our way. When we visited, we often took the sleeper train instead of flying, enjoying the chance to relax and soak in the scenery, something you can't appreciate from a plane. Now that we were both retired, we had the time to savor the journey ahead. The day before our trip felt heavy with anticipation. I felt an unusual excitement after seeing Holden off to his calligraphy class. With a few last-minute errands to run, I decided to go shopping, stopping at a cake shop to pick up some handmade cookies for the grandkids, thinking they would last longer than a cake. As I headed home, envisioning the smiles on their faces, it began to rain. At first, it was a light drizzle, but soon the downpour intensified. I hurried to get home, but on the way, I ducked into a convenience store to buy an umbrella. By the time I reached it, I was completely drenched. I considered waiting out the rain in the store, but not knowing how long it would last and yearning for a hot bath drove me to purchase the umbrella and dash home. As soon as I stepped through the door, ready to run myself a warm bath, my daughter-in-law appeared. "Sloan, are you about to take a bath? I need to go out, so let me use the bath first." "Oh, and can you start dinner early?" Without waiting for a response, she closed the bathroom door behind her. It infuriated me that she acted as if she owned the place when it wasn't even hers yet. Changing into dry clothes, I began preparing dinner, doing my best to ignore her presence. As I cooked, a sneeze escaped me, and I grimaced at the thought of catching a cold just a day before our trip. Meanwhile, my daughter-in-law lounged in the bath for over an hour while I felt my body grow colder. The next morning, the day we were supposed to visit our younger son and his family, I woke up feeling awful. My throat ached, my nose was running, and when I checked my temperature, it read 100 degrees Fahrenheit. I had indeed caught a cold from yesterday's rain. I told Holden he should go to Canada without me. I didn't want to risk spreading my illness to the grandchildren. He suggested we cancel the trip, but since we had already purchased sleeper train tickets and prepared gifts for the kids, I insisted he go alone. I handed him the cookies I had bought the day before and reassured him that it was just a minor cold, promising I would be fine after some rest and medicine. Before he left, Holden spoke to our eldest son and his wife, informing them of my illness and asking them to help with the housework while he was gone. After waving goodbye to Holden, I was about to crawl back into bed when I overheard my son and his wife talking. "Oh, what a hassle. It's just a cold, right? But at least now that Dad's gone, we can relax," they said, their dismissive tone echoing in my ears. I overheard their conversation, and I was stunned. How could they be so ungrateful while living in our house without contributing a single dime? Yet, this was typical behavior from them. "You know the only reason you're able to live like this is because of your father, right?" I finally confronted them, unable to stay silent any longer. Urker and his wife didn't take kindly to my words. My son snapped back, "We're doing you a favor by staying with you in your old age. Most people don't want to live with their in-laws." His wife chimed in, as if she had forgotten they were the ones who had moved in uninvited. It was ironic how they acted like they were doing us a huge favor when it was clearly the opposite. Feeling miserable and too exhausted to argue, I dragged myself back to bed, hoping to get some much-needed rest. Later that evening, my daughter-in-law barged into my room, waking me from my sleep. "Mother-in-law, you're not planning to skip dinner just because you're a little sick, are you? You know I can't cook." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. A grown woman, 33 years old, demanding that her sick mother-in-law cook simply because she didn't know how. Too weak to argue and desperate for rest, I wish Holden had been firmer with them before he left that morning. I tried to ignore her, hoping to go back to sleep, but my daughter-in-law refused to leave until I forced myself out of bed to make something for them. In the kitchen, I started preparing a simple meal. Urker came home, barely acknowledging my presence even though I was clearly sick and wearing a mask. He acted as if everything were perfectly normal. Without a second thought, he demanded, "Hey, is the bath ready yet?" They didn't care about my illness. Knowing there was no point in arguing with them, I hurried to finish making dinner and then prepared the bath afterward. When I returned to the living room, Urker and his wife were happily chatting away, enjoying the meal I had just cooked. Between bites, my daughter-in-law casually mentioned, "We're going on a trip abroad the day after tomorrow, so don't get us sick with your cold." I was taken aback. They hadn't said a word about planning a trip, let alone one abroad. Apparently, they were taking 3 weeks off to travel around Europe, and Urker had taken leave from his part-time job for it. While I was surprised, I also felt a sense of relief. At least they wouldn't be home for the next 3 weeks. However, the morning of their departure, my condition had worsened. My fever had spiked to nearly 103 degrees Fahrenheit, and I felt so weak that getting out of bed was impossible. My head pounded, and I was desperately thirsty, but I couldn't even muster the strength to reach for a drink. Just then, Kurt walked into my room without a hint of concern. "Hey, make us some food. You can still cook even if you have a cold," he said casually. I couldn't hold back my tears as I lay there, my own son demanding that I cook for him while I was too ill to even move. "Eat out," I muttered through my tears, but my frustration soon gave way to exhaustion. Feeling weak and burning up with fever, I barely had the energy to move, so I asked my son to bring me a glass of water, hoping he would help me in my time of need. Instead, he returned with a glass of beer. To my shock, he didn't hand it to me. He threw it all over me while I lay there, helpless. Soaked and stunned, I heard laughter from the doorway. My daughter-in-law stood there, clapping her hands and laughing along with Urker, who still held the empty glass. I was feverish and confused, but that moment was etched in my mind as clearly as day. Before they left, they casually remarked, "Make sure to clean the house before we get back, okay?" That was the last straw. I had reached my breaking point with Urker and his wife's selfish behavior. But this was too much. Mustering the strength to speak through the pain in my throat, I called out, "Yes, I'll clean it," loud enough for them to hear as they walked out. My name is Sloan, and I'm a 71-year-old housewife. My husband, Holden, is 73 and retired. Since leaving his job, he has found joy in teaching calligraphy to children at the local community center. His passion for calligraphy has been a lifelong dream, and seeing him head to the center every day with a smile fills me with happiness. We have 2 sons. Our younger son is married and has 2 wonderful children still in elementary school, while our eldest, Ricker, who is now 42, still lives with us. Until recently, he wasn't married, and although he works part-time at a convenience store for about 4 days a week, he doesn't contribute to the household financially or otherwise. Most of his time is spent lazing around. Holden and I have had countless conversations with him about his lack of responsibility, but nothing ever changed. At least he wasn't gambling or in debt, so after a while, we stopped nagging him. Then out of the blue, Urker announced that he had gotten married. He brought his wife home without any warning, and she moved in as if it was the most natural thing in the world. From that day forward, I found myself with another person to care for. Initially, I didn't mind cooking for my new daughter-in-law, but it quickly became clear that she had no intention of helping around the house. She wouldn't even clean up after herself, and not once did she thank me for the meals. Instead of appreciating my efforts, my daughter-in-law began making demands like asking me to serve her coffee after dinner, as if I were her maid. Holden couldn't bear to see this anymore, so he confronted Ricker and his wife, scolding them for their rudeness. Following that, they stopped making unreasonable requests, at least when Holden was around. But as soon as he left, my daughter-in-law resumed her usual behavior. "Mother-in-law, can you take this dress to the cleaners for me?" she would ask, as if it were a favor I should feel grateful to perform. I finally reached my limit and told her she was being selfish. To my dismay, Urker took her side. "Why are you being so stingy, Mom? It's just something you can do while you're out shopping," he said, defending her. Hearing him say that stung, especially since neither of them contributed anything to the household while living off us for free. I considered telling Holden about it but hesitated, not wanting to create tension between him and Ricker. So once again, I bit my tongue and took her clothes to the cleaners. Holden and I usually visit our younger son's family in Canada twice a year, and we were planning another trip soon for an upcoming week-long holiday. We cherish these trips, and our grandchildren have grown quite close to us. We had already purchased some toys as gifts, and I intended to pick up a special roll cake for the family on the way. We prefer taking the sleeper train when we visit rather than flying. The train ride is relaxing, allowing us to enjoy the scenic views. Now that we're both retired, we have the time to appreciate these little moments. The day before our trip, I felt unusually excited. After Holden left for his calligraphy class, I set out to do some last-minute shopping. While I was out, I stopped by a cake shop and bought some handmade cookies for the grandkids, thinking they would last longer than the roll cake I planned to buy on my way home. I couldn't help but smile, imagining how excited our grandchildren would be to see us. However, as I walked back, the weather turned, and it began to drizzle. The light rain quickly escalated into a downpour, and I hurried to get home. Deciding to stop by a nearby convenience store for an umbrella, I arrived drenched, my clothes clinging to my skin. Cold and tired, I could only think of how grateful I would be to finally be home. When I finally got home, hoping to warm up with a nice bath, my daughter-in-law suddenly appeared. "Sloan, are you about to take a bath? I need to go out, so let me use it first," she said, not even waiting for my response before shutting the bathroom door. Then she added, "Oh, and can you start dinner early?" This was my life now. All I could do was change into dry clothes and get started on dinner. Just then, the phone rang. It was the carpenter, a good friend of Holden's. He's about 58 and serves as the site supervisor for our new house. We hurried over to meet him, and he gave us a tour of the home, explaining every detail of the layout we had designed. We had envisioned a single-story, fully accessible house, keeping our future in mind as we aged. As we walked through, I was blown away by how beautiful the house turned out. Better than I had ever imagined. I could already picture us living there, enjoying our retirement. Some furniture left in the living room was moved by the carpenters, and when I thanked them, they simply smiled and said, "It's no problem." Holden helped us out a lot back in the day, so this is nothing. With that, Holden and I moved into our new home. It was more comfortable than we could have ever dreamed. For the first time in a long while, our lives felt peaceful, free from Rickert and his wife. We could finally relax. However, about a month after settling in, our peace was shattered. One day, without any warning, Rickert and his wife showed up at our new house. We hadn't told them where we'd moved, and we were certain our younger son Grady hadn't either. It seemed they had hired a private investigator to track us down. "Hey, it's not fair that you sold the old house, threw away our stuff, and moved into this nice place without us. I'm your eldest son, so I have the right to live here too, don't I?" Her demanded, glaring at us while holding large bags, clearly intending to move in. We were stunned. We had hoped to cut ties with them, but here they were, standing on our doorstep, determined to invade our lives once again. At that moment, Grady appeared from around the corner of the house. "What are you two doing here? Come to cause more trouble?" he asked, disbelief etched on his face. His wife and their 2 children, Delaney and Weston, were with him. They had come to visit us for the week to see the new house and spend time together, having just returned from a quick trip to the nearby convenience store. "Who are they? Are they bad people?" asked Delaney, our sweet 5th grader, her innocent voice cutting through the tension. Holden, who had been about to shut the door on Rickert and his wife, suddenly had an idea. "While Grady's family is staying with us for the week, you two can stay here as well. But let me be clear, this is temporary. I won't allow you to squat here indefinitely," he said firmly. Reluctantly, we welcomed everyone into the house, but almost immediately, Rickert and his wife sprawled out on the living room sofa, acting as if they belonged there. "Mother-in-law, can I have some coffee? I'll take mine black," Rickert's wife said nonchalantly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Brady's wife was taken aback by the audacity of the request. Before she could respond, the grandchildren jumped in. "Why can't you make it yourself? You're grown-ups. Even I can pour my own juice," Delaney said, her wide eyes darting between Rickert and his wife. Their innocent comments visibly unsettled Rickert's wife, and after a moment, she finally got up to make her own coffee. But the children weren't finished. "Why don't you cook?" "My mom cooks all the time," Weston chimed in. "Why don't you clean up after yourself?" "Dad and I always clean our plates when we're done eating," Delaney added. Brady's children were well-behaved and responsible, thanks to the solid upbringing they received from their parents. It must have been baffling for them to see 2 grown adults struggling with basic tasks like making coffee or cleaning up after themselves. At first, Rickert and his wife attempted to argue back, but the kids' questions never stopped. By the end of the week, they were completely worn out from the relentless barrage of inquiries. Rickert's wife was particularly upset that the kids kept calling her auntie. "Don't call me auntie," she snapped, clearly annoyed. "But why not? You are our auntie, aren't you?" "You're too old to be called sister," Delaney replied innocently. Rickert hit her hard, and even Grady and I, overhearing the exchange, couldn't help but chuckle. After Grady and his family left, we finally sent Rickert and his wife packing as well. They were so exhausted from the children's endless questioning that they didn't put up much resistance. It was a relief to see them go. A few months later, we received a message from Rickert asking if we could lend them some money. We couldn't believe it. They had lived off us for years, staying in our home and eating our food without contributing a penny. His part-time job at the convenience store had barely covered his basic expenses, and now that they were on their own, they were clearly struggling to make ends meet. His wife still had no intention of working, yet they were spending money as if they had it to spare, which they didn't. We refused their request, telling them we would not lend them money now or in the future. After that, we blocked Rickert's number. A few days later, while Holden and I were out, we received a call from our home security company. There had been an intruder in our house. When they sent us the video footage, we were stunned to see Rickert and his wife trying to break into our home through a window.